And banned literature is actually defined as the process in which a book is removed from a public shelf in a public school or a public institution. And then a challenge is also defined as a formal written complaint filed with a library or school requesting that the materials be censored or banned based on inappropriateness of the content. And my main three examples are To Kill a Mockingbird, Catcher in the Rye, and Huckleberry Finn. The three reasons why I chose these books is that they're American classics, they're frequently banned, and they're also three books that should be applied directly to school curriculums if possible. When I wrote my paper, I had a thesis statement. My thesis statement is that in order to broaden students' understandings of literature society, public schools should revoke reasonable literature bans and then apply them to the school curriculums. Of course, when I first started this paper, I had guiding questions. I didn't know exactly where to go. So the first place I started off were, why are books being banned? Who is actually initiating the bans on the books? And what are constitutional violations, like First Amendment rights, like what would be violating the First Amendment rights? And what are the harms to students and the writers of the books? And what are possible resolutions that we can be made to this issue? Of course, when I started this paper, I found out that books have been banned frequently in the past 10 years. Over 5,000 challenges have been made in the last 10 years, including the top three categories are unsuited for age group, the offensive language, and sexually explicit content. Of course, my thesis statement focuses on reasonable literature being applied. What I define as unreasonable is sexually explicit content because that doesn't appropriately aid in a student's understanding of society and literature. So even excluding that, there's still been 3,600 challenges of books in the past 10 years. They're also being most commonly banned in public schools and libraries. Actually, in the past 10 years, over 75% of all bans have taken place in public schools and libraries. And when it comes to focusing on who's actually making up the challenges, it comes to the parents. Parents make up over 50% of all challenges of books and of all the 5,000 challenges. Parents are given the right to determine what their children learn in school. However, they overstep their boundaries when they determine what other children are learning and what other children can and cannot learn. And the focus of that is because books being banned because a group of parents are making decisions for everyone's children, not just their own, and the school board doesn't feel like dealing with this issue, so they just ban it altogether. The harms to students, there are actually several different harms, including the inhibiting of students' empathy and understanding of society, where, for example, in To Kill a Mockingbird, the main character, Scout, this 9-year-old living in 1933 Maycomb, Alabama, is constantly being torn between the prejudice and racial norm of Alabama and this path of sympathy and understanding that her father is trying to make her follow. And she's torn throughout this entire book. And it really shows readers that we can't just go one path. It's actually sheltering them, I guess you could say, from the racial slurs that were in To Kill a Mockingbird. And by sheltering them from this, you're not really solving the issue. You're not addressing the problem that happened from it. You're just pretending it didn't happen, even though it happened. And the only way you can solve that is by addressing it and then solving it. Huckleberry Finn was another example of that. It's also been frequently banned for offensive language. But the thing is, when Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, he wrote it specifically as a satire of the South. He wrote it to joke the hypocrisy of the racial supremacy in the South. He wrote it by focusing on how the runaway slave named Jim was the most respectable and honorable character in the book by far, but because he's black, he's undermined as a character and seen as nothing more than a slave. Catcher in the Rye is another good example. J.D. Salinger wrote this book as a depiction of New York City in 1950s, and he didn't shine the light on just good people and just bad people. He shined the light on everyone. So you see everyone in their true colors in this city portrayal of New York City. You don't see just the big businesses. You don't see just the drug dealers. You see everything, especially as what Holden Caulfield, the 17-year-old, is going through when he travels through New York City. And in 1981, it was actually the #1 most banned book, but it was the #2 most taught in schools. And there was a case in 2006, this middle school in California had a censorship issue where there were students in this 6th grade class were given the opportunity to do independent research projects, actually like this, where they conducted a paper and then did a presentation about it. Her paper was about gay rights activist Harvey Milk and how he was slain. And she did great on the paper. She had a great grade on the paper, but because her presentation was controversial, the school just banned it. But upon realizing the issue of what happened, they decided to let her present her project, but under certain conditions. They had to say she could only present it during the recess time in the class. And if you wanted to view the presentation, you would have a parental permission note signed by your parents saying they gave their permission for you to see this presentation. If they didn't, you just went to recess. So that way no one's rights were being harmed, and that way they found a healthy solution. So that way she was able to do her hard work and give her presentation, and students were able to understand the rights and the activist movement that Harvey Milk presented. Of course, there are still violations of the Constitution. There are First Amendment rights, the freedom of speech, expression, the actually right to information. For example, in the Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, they determined that students, when they come to school, they don't shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gates. The Todd versus Rochester Community School District also determined that Slaughterhouse-Five, like any other book, has its exact right to be in the school library. The Right to Read Defense Committee versus the School Committee City of Chelsea determined that students should be expected and privileged with the opportunity to discover the magic of the school library and everything that's in it. By censoring these books, you're preventing these students from the opportunity to discover this magic. You're preventing them the opportunities to read these books, have these observations and this understanding that they're not being provided with sufficiently in another manner. Justice Brennan, also with Justice Marshall and Justice Stevens, decided in the Board of Education versus Pico trial that the First Amendment actually limits the school board from making these decisions. Even though the actual court case decided that school board had the right to, it was still a three-judge decision or vote that they don't have the right to do that, and they should not be limited in restricting books for these students. And just like the resolution that I presented from the California case, it's very simple. We revoke the bans for all reasonable literature, and we apply them to school curriculums. Then when it gets to that point in the curriculum, the note will be sent home with the students saying, for example, To Kill a Mockingbird is about to be read in 2 weeks in this class. It was banned previously for racial slurs, offensive language, infrequent references to rape, stuff like this. And then if the parent is satisfied with that, they can just sign off. But if they don't sign off on it, the student will just be given an alternate book to read. That way, it's a win-win for everybody, but the students are given this opportunity to read these controversial novels under an educated structure. They'll be able to understand exactly how Huckleberry Finn was a satire. They'll understand how Scout's path between sympathy and that path of turmoil she had to endure in the entire book. They won't be able to understand why the author wrote that, how the author wrote it, and the purpose of these books. And then these are some interesting videos that I had found that fit this topic. Well, anyways, while I get this fixed, basically this video focuses on different people of all ages reading controversial passages from novels, such as the 9-year-old reading The Invisible Man, and they ended with a man in his 60s reading Harry Potter, and his different passages that really show, and it really show these different understandings that students are able to view from these novels in a structured environment. Because if they just read it on their own and they're expected to understand this without a problem, they're not going to get these same messages that the school will be able to provide for them. Did you get it?
Ms. Kelly.
Oh, okay. All right, and then the other one focuses on Shel Silverstein, who's also a frequently banned poet, and it focuses, Whoopi Goldberg decides she's part of the banned book organization, and she doesn't agree that books are being banned. So she reads a passage of Shel Silverstein's poem to show how, even though these are controversial, they're necessary, and she doesn't agree with how they're being banned.